All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to be looking at the PowerPoint World War II Fallout. The big takeaway that you need to know is that World War II is going to immediately lead into the Cold War. And the reason why it's going to lead into the Cold War mainly has to do with the United States and the USSR's relationship. And looking at that relationship, we need to look at the leaders for both countries. We have FDR and we have Stalin. FDR and Stalin were friends during World War II, but that was more because of their hatred towards Germany. Afterwards, they weren't able to agree basically on anything. This starts at something called the Yalta Conference. At the Yalta Conference, this is where we figure out that we're basically just frenemies with the USSR, and we're not going to actually be able to get along with them post-World War II. One of the things that's going to happen with the fallout of World War II is our use of the atomic bomb at the end. In using the atomic bomb, some historians have argued that we did that to force the USSR to convert to the will of the United States. Basically, that we had this big bad weapon that the USSR didn't have and didn't even know about. The thing was, they did know about it. They had spies inside our atomic program, but they did allow us to keep all of Japan mainly because we had used our technology to defeat Japan. But the use of the atomic bomb to scare the USSR basically into following the United States' will is not going to work. So after World War II ended, first thing that's going to have to be decided is what to do with Germany. Now, the United States is going to want to give Germany back over to its people, but the USSR is not. If you remember, the USSR had a massive amount of casualties in World War II. The USSR had also been invaded by Germany twice in the past two world wars, and they did not want to try to give Germany a third opportunity to invade them. So Germany was going to be taken over by the USSR for all the land that they had taken, which was the eastern half. Not only did the USSR take over Germany, they're also going to take over basically every country that bordered Germany and create a buffer zone between the USSR and Germany. The United States, France, and the UK, meanwhile, are going to take over Western Germany. And so because of that, Germany was split in half. Kind of think about it like a kid who's got a divorced family, and each parent is vying for the attention of the child. This is also going to take place in Berlin. Now, this is awkward because Berlin was fully in the USSR side of Germany, and that's important to remember. Berlin is fully in the USSR side of Germany. But they're also going to split Berlin into East Berlin, which is going to be controlled by the USSR, and West Berlin, which is going to be controlled by the United States. This is going to become the famous Berlin Wall that's going to divide the city. Same thing is going to happen in Korea. Korea is going to have half of it be controlled by the United States and half of it be controlled by the USSR. And when no agreement can be made about what type of government should be run, a communist government or a democratic government, they're just going to create North Korea and South Korea. And this is important because these are going to be the first two big war zones for this Cold War, Germany and Korea. And that's all because of the disagreements that could not be resolved after World War II. Now, another thing that needed to be decided were the war crimes that were committed during World War II, both by the Germans and by the Japanese. Both are going to have trials. Now, Stalin, again, the leader of the USSR, he wanted to kill like 5,000 Germans. Basically, if you had a German uniform, he wanted to kill you. The United States decided that there should be a formal trial, and that's called the Nuremberg Trial, where they put basically the highest ranking officials on trial for what they did during World War II. They decided not to charge soldiers, individual soldiers, for what they did because basically if a soldier didn't follow the commands of an official, they could be killed themselves. So it's kind of like somebody having a gun put to their head, being told to go shoot somebody else. You wouldn't really blame the person who's got the gun to their head. You would want to find the person who's put the gun to their head. And so because of that, we didn't charge individual soldiers. And we didn't get every single high-ranking Nazi official. Some of them had committed suicide. The top three, Hitler, Himmler, and Goebbels, all committed suicide. Some of them famously snuck to Argentina and lived in Argentina and South America for a while. But we did put some of them on trial, and they were executed. Same thing took place in Japan, but in Japan, the big debate was should the emperor be put on trial because the emperor knew everything that was going on and kind of gave blessing to it. The United States didn't do this because they were afraid of mass suicide if they did actually execute the emperor, and they saw this as kind of a peace offering to the Japanese people to show them that they weren't coming in to try to completely remove their culture. And so because of that, he was seen as a sign of unity. Two more things. First, the UN was created. The United Nations is going to be a replacement for the League of Nations, and it is going to be this peacekeeping organization. Now, certain ways it's been really good, certain ways it hasn't. There are 5 permanent members of the UN. You have France, Great Britain, the United States. Those are the victors of World War II. China, and Russia. During the Cold War, the UN's not going to be incredibly useful because all 5 members basically have to agree to do something with the UN. Russia and the United States, or the USSR and the United States, are always going to be on opposite ends of the agreement. So because of that, they're going to be basically standstill. But since the 1990s, the UN has more or less been this peacekeeping organization. And lastly, we have a decolonization period. This is where people finally realize that controlling other people against their will was bad. It's only taken us hundreds of years of human history and American history to get to this point. So the British Empire and the other European empires are going to begin to fall apart. India is going to start to get its independence. Egypt's going to get their independence. Those are the first 2 major nations that had this happen. In addition to this, you're also going to have the creation of a Jewish state in Israel. Now, this was something that was promised actually after World War I by the British. The British promised to build a Jewish state in the Middle East, in Israel, because this was their holy land that they got kicked out of 2,000 years ago. But they didn't do it. And so after World War II, with all these Jewish people being killed during the Holocaust, the British and the United States are going to decide that it's time for the Jews to have their own political state again. The problem is the political state they're going to build, other people felt like was already their land themselves. This is Palestine, controlled by Arab Muslims. And so this is going to create massive tension when Israel is created, because now Israel, all these Jews are going to move down there, and Jews and Muslims are not going to get along with each other. And so because of that, a lot of Muslim Arab nations are immediately going to go to war with Israel. Seven countries went to war with Israel the day after it was created. And Israel was able to hold off this attack mainly because it was well supplied by the United States and the other victors of World War II. But this is something that still brings up tension in the Middle East today.